It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Widespread unrest across the country as officers are injured and multiple arrests are made. We'll have the latest on the situation as police try to maintain order and the government promise action.
Anyone who engages in this kind of disorder needs to be clear that they will pay the price.
In Southport, anger at those trying to hijack the loss of 3 young girls and positive action to bring the community together.
I'm live in Paris with news of more medals for Team GB and more controversy in the Olympic boxing ring. Another Olympic gold for the rowers and a haul of bronze medals elsewhere, confirming Great Britain's best ever opening week to a Games. A medal confirmed too for the boxer in the eye of the gender eligibility storm, Imam Khalif, as the Algerian won again.
Also tonight on Sky News at 10, Donald Trump's son, Eric, responds to the Kamala Harris momentum in an interview with Sky News.
What? I don't need the earpiece. Oh, I'm on live TV. Oh, hello. Oh, goodbye. Which way do I go?
Plus, has the change of government killed political satire? We'll be in the thick of it at Edinburgh Fringe to find out. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Police have been out in force in many cities in the UK as mass disorder continued today in the wake of the attack in Southport, in which 3 little girls died. Well, arrests have been made and police have faced violence at nearly 20 protests in major cities and towns across Britain following Monday's attack. Police in Liverpool say a number of officers have been injured after fights broke out between anti-immigration protesters and anti-fascist demonstrators. 4 people have been arrested for public order offences in Hull. 3 police officers are believed to have been injured in clashes. And in Bristol, several arrests have been made after protests there turned hostile. Here's our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam.
They are scenes that are now happening daily in towns and cities across the country. In Bristol, there were clashes as police tried to keep apart a group of far-right protesters and a much larger anti-fascist counter-protest. It felt unpredictable, confrontational and tense, as in so many places in the last few days, the police right in the middle of the disorder. In Hull city centre, another standoff between a large group of protesters and police. Some were filmed taking a piece of scaffolding, apparently to use as a missile, and what's become the soundtrack for many taking part in these protests.
We want our country back! We want it now! We want our country back now!
This is what residents saw after tyres and bins were set alight. By the evening, there was just the sound of the alarms in shops that had been broken into. The street littered with the debris of a rampage through the city. In Liverpool too, officers came under attack from a far-right mob. Here, as elsewhere, a number of officers were injured. Police in running battles with some of those in the city's streets. And this just a few miles from Southport, where the attack on children at a dance class seemingly lit the fuse. As a mob came marauding down this street about an hour ago, shops were forced to close, this area was locked down. It's a measure of the impact these incidents are having on towns and cities, and of course most of all on the police trying to deal with them. And the big question, of course, is how long will this go on for? Similar scenes in Nottingham, bottles thrown as fighting broke out. And in Blackpool, where more fighting erupted in the crowd, their loyalties very clear.
Any person organising or taking part in the procession is committing an offence.
In Belfast too, a hotel housing migrants was the target, leading to clashes with police. More than 24 protests have taken place across the country. Last night it was Sunderland that saw the worst of the violence, its streets bearing the scars today. Northumbria police released these images of officers at a house where they believed some of those involved in the disorder were. 2 people were arrested. There are warnings to those responsible. They will face action.
Well, the police need to lead operations in communities across the country where there has been both violent disorder and thuggery on the streets, which is completely unacceptable, completely damaging, and where the police need to know they have our full support, taking the strongest possible action, making sure that these criminals face the full force of the law.
In Manchester today, a supermarket was ransacked by a mob as they ran from police.
Refugees are welcome here.
But the city also saw one of the many counter-protests today, anti-fascists marching with their message. A sense that some are not willing to stand by as the wave of summer violence rolls on. And among others, whatever the response, clear defiance. Greg Milam, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, we'll speak to Greg in a moment and we'll get the latest on the government's response to the unrest from our political correspondent Rob Powell in Downing Street. But first, Tom Cheshire is in Bristol, which has seen some of the worst disorder today. Tom, you even had a missile thrown at yourself.
Yeah, we came under, we both got bottles of beer in the head wearing our helmets, so everything was fine. But it was, it started at Castle Park and it was almost medieval. The counter-protesters in their hundreds were ready and waiting for the right-wing protesters, and they occupied the walls, they drove them down, and that's when we saw some of the most intense clashes. And that's what's been really hard for the police today. Their job has been to keep those two sides apart, and that's where we are now. But after those crashes, we saw punches thrown, missiles thrown. As you say, we were hit by missiles ourselves. Dogs were used, horses charging around. It was really confrontational, really in each other's faces. It seemed quieting down, but it just kept happening, skirmish after skirmish, ending up around here. We're a bit out of the town centre at the moment, up over there in that over on a hill just in front of where I'm looking right now is a hotel that's been used to house asylum seekers. Again, there are protesters outside there in their hundreds, calling themselves anti-fascist protesters, ready to see a much smaller dispersed crowd. This feels now like the dying embers of what has been a very, very fiery day, but it has been this feedback, Luke. If as soon as it feels like it's quieting down, both sides antagonising each other, really in each other's faces, really a lot of mutual loathing on each side. Right now, police have the situation under control.
OK, Greg, you're in Liverpool for us tonight. What's the latest on the police response there?
Well, the Assistant Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Ginny Sims, who was in charge of the police operation today, has issued a statement tonight where she talked about this disorder, putting decent members of the public at risk, including children, talking about reports of families having to run from areas where some of this disorder was taking place for their own safety, even some children who've been brought here to see a Disney cruise ship unable to do that, forced to leave the area, talking about disorder, violence and destruction having no place in this city. But that's what we saw throughout the course of the day. About 750 people in that group of far-right protesters, another 750 in the counter-protest. They met here. The police wanted to keep them apart, but were unable to. And I think we see that it's very difficult for the police when that sort of number get involved. They have to just let it play out as best they can and try to keep the peace. 6 people arrested here, 2 officers injured, 1 hit by a chair in the face, a motorcycle officer pulled off his motorbike and suffered injuries as well. Earlier today, I was at Southport in Merseyside, of course, where all of that happened on Monday, what seemingly lit the fuse for what has happened in the days since. There was planned to be a protest there. It didn't materialise. All we saw there again today were local people coming to lay flowers and reflect and mourn on those lives lost. And you do feel, seeing that and seeing what happened here and across the country, a big disconnect between what happened on Monday and what has happened subsequently.
Let's cross to Rob Powell, who's in Downing Street for us. And Rob, you interviewed the Home Secretary. How confident are the government that they have this under control?
Gillian, Downing Street is lit up again tonight as a mark of respect for the 3 little girls that lost their lives earlier this week. The government now finds itself dealing with a whole new set of events. I think the government response has been to try and be as visible as possible, to sort of put out a message that they're alive to the risks and the seriousness of the situation, but I think it's also been quite carefully calibrated. They are very aware in government that information and misinformation can spread rapidly, so sound bites interventions need to be quite tightly buttoned down. They're talking a lot about violence and law breaking rather than some of the political arguments that people say lie behind some of the unrest that we've seen. The difficulty for the government is that in circumstances like this, people ask what ministers are doing to stop the violence, and yet the practical levers that they can actually pull here in Westminster are limited because it's mainly for the police to respond, and ministers are often reticent to try and interfere or pressurise the police in their response. So I think we get language more than anything. We get setting the tone, talking about people paying the price if they are found to be committing violence, and also Yvette Cooper today talking about the full force of the law coming down on people. I think there are more practical things the government can do with that. They've talked about court space being freed up, prison space being freed up, prosecutors being brought in so quick charging decisions can be made, all quite reminiscent of 2011, the London riots, when we saw courts sitting through the night. Now, the chief prosecutor of the country at the time, one Sir Keir Starmer, at the time said that he believed that was a deterrent. The speedy charging and conviction of people was a deterrent to stop people going out and committing more violence. So it seems like part of that strategy is trying to be replicated now. It is a different beast running the show from Downing Street, though, and I think if this violence and disorder persists, the questions will only get more political about resource in policing, about resource in the court and prison system, and about some of the underlying tensions and divisions across the country that can lead to this sort of violence in the first place. The last thing a new government needs, barely a month into its time in office.
Rob, thank you. Well, in Southport itself, people have been angered at the violence elsewhere in the country that claims to be in response to the tragic killing of 3 young girls. And others have begun to take positive action to help those who are grieving. From Southport, Fraser Maud sent this report.
5 days after Southport was sent into shock by an utterly horrific act of violence, many here are still trying to find sense in the senseless. The number of flowers, toys and messages brought in tribute continues to grow. This, the residents here say, is the true reflection of their community, one which will not be divided, despite the violent attempts of others to do so.
Absolute disgrace how people can even have the thought process to turn up and riot and to use their right-wing extreme agenda.
That does not represent Southport anyway.
Several community events are being planned here over the coming days, including one at a local church next Thursday. Sadly, its organisers have had to consider people's fears over safety and take steps to reassure them.
We will understand people are concerned about attending events like this, but we have implemented security measures. We are having security there.
It's that time of year again.
Meanwhile, the BBC has removed a promotional video from its archive which features the youth accused of the murders, Axel Rudakabana, when he was aged 11. Children in Need says it has done so out of respect for everyone impacted by this shocking case. Less than a mile away from the scene at the town's football club today, a friendly match designed to bring people together to pay further tribute to those left grieving and to gather donations for Alder Hey Children's Hospital.
Now is a good time for families to be able to share the day.
Children are scared everywhere, and it's good that they can come here and hopefully feel safe.
Here kind of supports Bibi and her family.
And you went to school with Bibi, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of brings the community back together again, and you know, it's nice to see.
The players wore black armbands and laid flowers of support and remembrance before an emotional 2 minutes of silence, then applause.
Football clubs isn't just about watching the football, it's about community, it's about, you know, the match day experience, going for a couple of drinks, meeting up with neighbours, meeting up with friends, whatever that may be. So it gives everyone an opportunity who comes to maybe do that and and reflect and pay our respects.
As the residents continue their stewardship of the hundreds of tributes, it shows the continuing dignity and compassion of the people who live here. As one said, this is a small town, but with a big community. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Southport.
Good evening from Paris, where it's been another successful day for Team GB. 6 more medals, bringing the total to 33 and 5th in the medal table. Bronze was the colour of the day, but with a big chunk of gold. Well, the athletics began in earnest at the Stade de France, and what a way to start with the women's 100 metres and a new champion. Well, America's pre-race favourite and world champion, Sha'Carri Richardson, made a nervous start, but there were no such nerves from her main competitor, Julian Alfred of St Lucia. Daryl Nater, Britain's sole competitor in the final, came home 4th. Well, these were the scenes in St Lucia as Julian Alfred won the Caribbean islands' first ever Olympic medal of any colour. She won in a national record of 10.72 seconds. Team GB's rowing wrapped up their most successful Olympic Games since 2012 with 2 more medals, including a gold in the men's 8s. 36 athletes from the 42 who came to Paris will go home with the medal, including the women's 8 who took bronze this morning. And in the gymnastics arena, Ireland's Rhys McClenaghan claimed their first ever Olympics gymnastics gold. He performed a flawless routine on pommel horse 3 years after falling on the same piece in Tokyo. And he was in tears as he waited confirmation of his achievement. But there was no medal for GB's greatest ever gymnast, Max Whitlock, who finished off the podium places on the same piece of apparatus in his last ever Olympic Games. Well, our sports correspondent Rob Harris joins me now. But Rob, there was some good news in the gymnastics arena for Team GB.
Yes, Jake Jarman, one of those to win bronze today. What a 5 bronze for GB. Another impressive one was in the regatta because it saw some sibling success. While Tom Ford claimed gold in the men's 8, sister Emily was a bronze medalist. They're certainly really happy for them. But one person who wasn't happy to get bronze was in Emma Wilson in the windsurfing. She was distraught to miss out on gold, believing a format change cost her the chance of glory. She said she's now done with the sport. But some other bronzes as well in the equestrian, the team dressage celebrating, and in the track at the Stade de France, the 4x4 400-metre relay squad beginning the medal run for GB. But what an incredible night for 2 small Caribbean islands, winning their first ever medals, and both were golds too. We saw in the 100-metre final Julian Alfred of St Lucia and Thea Lafond of Dominica. So what a night for them.
Now it's guaranteed. Iman Khalif will leave Paris with a medal. But how much more will she endure before the Olympics are over? Here there was strong Algerian support to see her reach the boxing semi-finals on a unanimous decision. But Olympic officials are concerned about hate speech, as her right to compete as a woman is subject to intense scrutiny. And here's the reason why. Umar Kremlev, president of the International Boxing Association, that disqualified Khalif from last year's World Championships after beating a Russian. Now Kremlev has spoken exclusively to Sky News from Russia about why Khalif faced a gender eligibility test, repeating unverified results, still with few details, claiming to protect private genetic data.
The women's coaches complained a lot, and because of this we started the checks. We didn't just start it like that, but at the request of the female athletes. When we did the test at the World Championships, the test showed that these were men. It's sad when we shout to the whole world that we are for gender equality and the protection of women, and then they simply destroy women's sports. We must not allow this to happen. If we remain silent now, then later it will become normal.
Kremlev is an ally of Vladimir Putin, but a question about Kremlin links was turned into complaints about Russia being banned from competing as Russia over the war in Ukraine, calling it humiliating. and denouncing the Olympic leadership, which blames Russia for trying to sow disruption.
Do you believe the Russian state could be involved in sowing doubts over the gender status of the boxers, trying to stoke disruption in some form?
What we have seen, from the Russian side, and in particular from the International Federation, from which we had to withdraw the recognition for many reasons that they have undertaken already way before these games with a defamation campaign against France, against the games, against the IOC.
The IOC insists Iman Khalif was raised as a woman, so should be allowed to fight as a woman. The same for Lin Yong-ting, trying to secure a medal herself tomorrow, while her gender is also disputed. Boxers facing aggression beyond the ring, as eligibility becomes increasingly politicised and toxic. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
So the boxing controversy continues here at the Olympics. That is all from Paris for now. Back to Gillian for the rest of today's news.
Jackie, thank you. Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, has hit out at the media for putting Kamala Harris on what he called a fake pedestal. He also talked about the assassination attempt on his father and defended J.D. Vance as the vice presidential pick. Our US correspondent Mark Stone sat down with him at the Trump International Scotland golf course near Aberdeen.
3 weeks since his father was almost shot dead, and 2 weeks since Joe Biden dramatically dropped out, a new Scottish golf course was a break from the extraordinary election campaign for Eric Trump. The former president's third child and a key figure now in his father's quest back to the White House.
Come and have a seat and we'll have a chat. Thanks.
Sat down with Sky News to defend, to predict and to reflect.
The TVs were carrying it live. I had my kids in my lap, and my wife was in the room, and that's when we heard the shots. So I grabbed his ear and have all the guys dive on him.
Did you think he was dead?
You certainly think the worst, or at least presume sometimes the worst, right? I mean, here's what I can tell you: it's never good when you have blood coming out of the side of your ear, right? In life, that's not a good thing. The chances of a bullet just grazing an ear, probably defy statistics.
Did it change him?
I think that probably puts what's important in life in perspective. At the same time, he pops off that stage, and what does he do? Fight, fight, fight.
There's no denying that his reaction was extraordinary. But in the environment that America is in at the moment, does he accept that those words, fight, 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 will have different interpretations and potentially it could be very dangerous in a country where, I see the division all the time?
That can't be a serious question. I mean,
why not?
The guy just had a bullet put in his ear. And you want to talk about, healing division. Our country needs a fighter. And saying fight, fight, fight is symbiotic of a person who is seeing a nation that's in decline, who's seeing a Western world that frankly is in decline.
So what about the man who might be vice president? J.D. Vance was the star choice at the convention 2 weeks ago, but since then Donald Trump's been forced to defend him, even dismiss his relevance. Buyer's remorse?
No, I don't think so. I think my father really likes J.D. I think he likes his positions. I think he likes the fact that he's youthful, he can carry the torch.
Is he the candidate that's going to attract women, though? I mean, that cat lady's comment. The country's being run by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. Pretty awkward comment for the vice presidential candidate to make, no?
You don't think I could go through Kamala Harris's comments?
There is no doubt that the election has now taken on a different post-Biden vibe. But if it feels like the momentum is with the new opponent, well, it's phony, he says, just like her.
The mainstream media in the United States has put her on this pedestal. It's a fake pedestal, right? No different than the pedestal that they put Joe Biden on.
Do you accept, though, regardless of who you blame for this, that the momentum right now is with the Democrats and with Kamala Harris?
Well, it depends on how you define the momentum.
Eric Trump, thank you very much.
Are we talking all about golf, or was this...
We're talking about golf?
Next time, maybe. Mark Stone, Sky News in Aberdeen.
And you can watch the full interview with Eric Trump on Sky News throughout tomorrow and online. At least 32 people have been killed and 63 others injured in a bomb attack on a beach in Somalia. The explosion happened as people swam at a popular resort in the capital, Mogadishu, late yesterday. Police said one attacker blew himself up, 3 others were killed by security forces, and another was captured alive. 15 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. It hit a school building which was being used to shelter displaced people. Hamas said 2 other strikes in the West Bank killed 9 fighters, including an Hamas commander. The US Defense Secretary has revoked a plea deal which would have seen the men accused of plotting the 9/11 attacks avoid death sentences. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind seen here, and 2 others were offered the deal on Wednesday. Lloyd Austin says the men are no longer eligible for life sentences in prison without the prospect of the death penalty. A humpback whale missing its tail has been spotted off the coast of Washington state. A whale's tail, or flukes, are essential for its ability to swim, according to experts. The research director at the Whale Museum in Washington says it's likely the animal lost its tail when swimming through fishing gear.
It's thought that this is due to an entanglement that caused the animal to lose both flukes. But the fact that it's still persisting and managing to forage to some degree, obviously, and maintain is pretty remarkable.
The Edinburgh Fringe is underway with more than 3,500 shows set to take place over the next month. But with politicians often finding themselves the butt of the joke, will the new Labour government change the feel of the festival? Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, has been in the thick of it to find out.
The show posters are a clue. All change at number 10. And for this year's Edinburgh Fringe, it's meant a fair few comedians doing hasty rewrites. In with the new.
No one likes you, Nigel.
That's why they elected me.
And out with the old. Or almost.
What? I don't need the earpiece. Oh, I'm on live TV. Oh, hello.
Noreen Skinner not quite ready to say goodbye just yet. Her show, The Exorcism of Liz Truss, based around her popular viral videos. The comedians set at the Fringe, a warm-up of sorts ahead of the actual former Prime Minister being in town next week as a guest speaker.
I'm still not losing my seat because I've bought all of the chairs in IKEAs.
Some friends sent me a video of her and said, you have to do a parody. And then so it started as a bit of a joke. I hadn't really known what the tone of the show was going to be and whether it's okay to still use as much of the material that I had before while Conservatives were in, so I needed to adapt it, put some Labour references in there, as well as the stand-up that links it in, add some new characters, and try and work out what the tone of the show is going to be, whether it's like nostalgic almost now, or whether it's still fresh enough. So it'll be really interesting to see how the show develops over time.
For some stand-ups, this Fringe will be all about reflecting back on the Conservative government's unwitting contribution to comedy. Going forward, of course, Sir Keir Starmer now has to get used to being the new butt of the jokes around here.
No stranger to the demands of political comedy, Matt Ford quite enjoying having some new characters to master.
People think, because Keir Starmer's perhaps a bit calmer, that maybe it's less fun than doing Boris Johnson, but he still has his own characteristics. And he's, there's something very locked up about Keir Starmer. The upright back, the chest out, the block, the constantly sounding annoyed about whatever's going on in our country. Whatever's going on. That repetition at the end of sentences and the way that he sounds.
A time to throw out old jokes at the end of a political chapter that has provided plenty of punchlines for comedians here. Katie Spencer, Sky News in Edinburgh.
Time now to get the rest of the day's sport away from the Olympics with Nick.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
A first ever elite disability match at Lord's. The MCC took on an ECB 11, featuring members from all 5 England disability teams.
Yeah, it's one of them days where you just get shivers all day because you look around, you're at Lords. Like Ben Folkes just gave us our caps in and he said every international cricketer wants to play at Lords. So for us disability cricketers to play here for the first time ever, it's a special occasion, hopefully one that everyone cherishes no matter whether they succeed on the pitch or off it. It's going to be one of them days where you're just grateful to sort of be here and playing at Lords. Any disability sport, you constantly want to play on the biggest stages and get our opportunity to kind of show our story. We want to be judged as cricketers and then disabled athletes afterwards. We don't want our disabilities to tell the story, we want our cricket to tell the story. So to play at Lords and have that platform to show how good we are as cricketers, first of all, is it's a massive occasion for all of us.
It's a huge step in the right direction of where we want disability cricket to go. To have a game at such a high prestige venue, it's a great moment in disability cricket.
Among the spectators, a couple of special guests, England's Ben Folkes and Australia's Nathan Lyon, both getting a sense of what cricket is like for the visually impaired.
For the guys, it's an incredible day, and obviously exposure for the sport, being able to play it at a place that every cricketer wants to play is an amazing moment, and yeah, I'm quite excited to watch it. I remember the first time I got to play here, and it is something that every kid growing up wants to do.
Oh, it's amazing, mate. That's why my stint with Lancashire ended a couple of weeks ago, and I just wanted to make sure I hung around so I can come here and witness this. I do a lot of work with the disabilities teams back home, and I thoroughly enjoy my work with them. And to see that.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Observer, quoting the Home Secretary tonight. Their headline, "Rioters will pay the price as wave of violence sweeps UK." We'll be right back. Do stay with us.
Big stories don't always come from big cities.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the wave of street violence in towns and cities across the UK is top story in The Observer, which carries the Home Secretary's pledge that rioters will pay the price for the disorder. As part of that, the Telegraph says that 24-hour court hearings are to be set up to process those arrested and charged with the disorder. This is the front of the Sunday Times. Riots engulf Britain. The Sunday People calls the riots a day of shame on our streets, while the Express reports that a top-secret military unit has been called in to hunt down the far-right people involved in the riots. The Mail on Sunday, Sarah Vine writes on the front page of what she calls a summer of discontent attacking the rioters, but also the new Labour government for the way it's all being handled by ministers. The Mirror leads with calls from the young man at the centre of the Hugh Edwards indecent images case for BBC boss Tim Davie to be sacked over the way the corporation dealt with the allegations. And finally, the Star has a survey which says that most Brits think they come up with their best ideas while sitting on the loo. I don't think we'll be discussing that. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with The Observer. I'm sure we can take quite a bit of time talking about what's unfolded on the streets of our cities across the country well, the last couple of days. So The Observer, quoting the Home Secretary, rioters will pay the price.
Well, it's just tragic. It is utterly tragic that the murder of these 3 children has led to this absolute wave of violence. And there are so many tragic elements to this. I mean, the first one and the most obvious one is that Southport was and is utterly devastated by what has happened there. It was clearly, in many ways, a very supportive community. What we've seen in the community with the way, for example, that the local imam responded to what happened in the mosque and the way that local people instantly rebuilt the wall and repaired the damage and swept up the streets was very moving. And for people to be bussed in from around the country to cause mayhem and to harm the police officers who tried to protect the children and who have worked heroically and do work heroically in the face of these disasters is utterly tragic. And there are many, many components of this, but I have to say that clearly it is fomented by people on the far right, but it is also fomented by people like Nigel Farage. And the role of social media, disinformation, distortion and egging on channels like Telegram now makes it possible to galvanise people very quickly to cause maximum damage. And it's just heartbreaking to see how this has been hijacked by what we must call thugs and yobs, because that's what they are.
And criminals, as the Home Secretary has, it's criminal behaviour, Benedict.
It is, and I think if I were to have one criticism, I wouldn't have many criticisms of the government actually at this stage. I think that it's sort of too early to get into the details, but the one criticism that I would have was during his speech, his press conference to the nation in the aftermath of the initial riot in Southport, the Prime Minister wasn't, I think, firm enough in saying that actually any amount of rioting, any amount of disorder going forward will be dealt with very heavy-handedly. He singled out certain individual groups. He tried to talk about how there was going to be a little bit more sort of nuance to this. I think what was required in that situation was to say just flat out, there's going to be zero tolerance on anything, because actually one of the major fears that we are now going to face, almost certainly we're now going to face, is the fear about different communities, if they see far-right agitators coming into their communities, is taking up arms to try to defend themselves or to try to respond if, say, a mosque has been targeted. Perhaps some people decide that they're going to retaliate against something else. We saw this last year, actually, between Muslim and Hindu youths, and this was why I thought it was really interesting and a mistake that the Prime Minister decided to single out just the far right on this, because last summer we had groups of Hindu and Muslim youths travelling from around the country to different parts to fight each other on the basis of a cricket match. And so to sort of pinpoint this tactic that was used by those youths and then apply it exclusively to the far right, it sort of, I fear, lays the ground to say that this is all about the far right, rather than to say that rioting in general is bad. Because, of course, we also need to remember that where this has come from, we had a riot a couple of weeks ago in Hare Hills, and that's not to say that necessarily the two things are linked, they're not. But I suspect what has happened is that a lot of far-right agitators have seen their opportunity in Southport and also seen a poor police response in Hare Hills and gone, do you know what, these people are weak. These authorities are not what they were, they're not what they should be. And if we try and cause trouble, actually, we can get a lot further than perhaps we thought we could have done in the past, because the old bill's not up to it. And I think what was needed in that situation was a Prime Minister to say, look, I don't care what your motivation is, if you're the far right, if you're trying to defend yourselves, if you're something else. In a society such as ours, there is no rioting. We don't care if the police are, you feel
but I suppose
unjustly coming for your children or anything else.
he started with the far right because that's where it began.
Of course, but this is the point. The whole part of the narrative around the far right is this idea of two-tier policing, that there is an unfair, unjust system. If you only then talk about the far right exclusively, you feed into their paranoia, into their narrative, that they are being unfairly targeted. And this is the thing, as I say, this hasn't been created in a vacuum. These are people who are latching onto a community's justified anxiety and pain at what's happened. They will look for other excuses elsewhere, but where they do that, other communities, if they also feel that the police aren't responding strongly, may decide to take things into their own hands, and that is, that has to be a red line. We cannot have a situation where you have vigilanteism or different communities feeling they have to protect themselves because the police won't, and that is perhaps the only criticism that I would level at the government at this moment. But we have already seen this today in different parts around the UK. Different communities deciding, actually, we do not trust the police to do this. We are going to have to front up against it.
Let's bring in some of the other papers. The Sunday Times, their headline, riots engulf Britain. We've also got the Telegraph, 24-hour courts to tackle rioters. That's something that the Home Secretary was keen to put out there, that the legal system will deal with these people swiftly.
Yes, and I think that she's absolutely right to do that, and I think that the 24-hour courts happened after the Tottenham riots and were pretty effective. But another thing I want to say in response to, I don't disagree with anything you said there, Benedict, but I think my friend's son got caught up in the Tottenham riots and got sent to jail and his life has been kind of pretty much destroyed by what happened. We have to remember that I don't have any sympathy for the far-right thugs and yobs in this situation. I don't have sympathy for any groups of violent, marauding men who go around and attack innocent people and burn down shops and burn cars and so on, or hurl bricks at policemen. But what I do understand a bit of is the dynamics of the crowd and social contagion. And this happens with young men. I mean, actually, they're not all young men, but it happens with men who, for whatever reasons, feel disenfranchised in every society around the world. And fires have been stoked here, and it is tragic. And I want to say something else, which is, on Tuesday night, I was coming back from a friend's birthday dinner, and a few minutes after I walked round the corner from where I live, a man was murdered. His name was Derek Thomas. He was a bus driver. He drove the 106. I lived in my area for 25 years, so I've probably been on his bus many times. He was black, and he was 52. He was not a young man. He was not a boy, although, as it happens, within the previous week, a 15-year-old boy was also murdered in our neighbourhood. There has been nobody rioting for Derek Thomas. There was a small pile of flowers. I put flowers down there myself today. And for me, every time I walk past that spot, which is a green where there is a playground and children play and families have picnics and people run and go for walks. It's a happy, pretty place, and that has been sullied for life. Every time I walk past that spot, so far I have cried, and I can't see that stopping anytime soon. So I would just like to say that any death is a tragedy, and the absolute epidemic of knife crime that there is around the country, but particularly in Hackney, where I live, is a tragedy. And the government and Sadiq Khan and the police have to address that, because there are waves of contagion here and they are wrecking people's lives.
If I may, I mean, a boy was stabbed to death on my street 2 years ago, just outside my house as well. And I think that's very interesting, because when the Prime Minister went to Southport and members of the local community started shouting at him, and they weren't shouting about Islamism or migration, they were just talking about dead kids. They were talking about people being stabbed. There was none of the sort of the underlying narratives. It was about crime that affects children. And this is something, actually, that a lot of communities, this is the vacuum in which extremists will fill, where there is the breakdown in law and order and there is the perception that actually criminality, violent criminality, that can affect not just children, as you say, people of all ages, all walks of life. When it starts to seep through, that is where you get the breakdown in community tension. And that's why I say, the actual, the approach of this government, this new government, may not be what they want to do. They may want to appear very conciliatory. It has to be zero tolerance on this sort of crime, because actually it is what leads to the degradation of the high trust society that is actually the reason why Britain is attempting to be a leading multicultural society, a place where people want to move to, because it holds itself to higher standards than other places do. They have to nip that in the bud, or people will exploit these situations.
OK. Benedicta and Christina, thank you. We have run out of time for that section, but thank you very much for sharing your personal stories as well. Coming up, we're going through more of the stories, including this on the front of the Mirror, which has been speaking to the boy at the centre of the Hugh Edwards case. Stay with us for more.
So I went to the police. I'll never forget what they said to me when I walked in. I went there, told them, I've got this woman who's buzzing my house constantly, sitting in the pub, looking at me, wanting to get my attention. What do? They laughed, smirked behind the screen and said, look, mate, the best thing you've got to do is just tell her to go away. I said, I've done that. And they said, there's nothing we can do for you. And I just looked at him thinking, wow. And I was fuming, so I walked out. It was just constant. She'll follow me to work, sit in the pub, wait for me at the station. I look around, if I'm walking, I'll just turn around, I'll see her 20 metres behind me.
The court has found her guilty. You're waiting for her to be sentenced. Are you hopeful she will get a lengthy sentence, that this will stop?
Can I be honest with you? Hand in my heart, I don't think it'll ever stop until I move from where I'm living. But once she gets sentenced, and I'm hoping it's going to be a long one, then I can actually start to make some changes.
Well, because legislation to tackle stalking passed in '97, strengthened in 2012, upgraded again in 2019. But only 5% of stalking reports to the police result in a charge being pursued, while successful convictions are obtained in just 1.7% of cases. So we're at a point where we're talking about taking stalking seriously, but it doesn't seem to be happening.
No, I'm thinking, well, as a white man, will I get dealt with quicker? Why am I still going through this 27 years? They always say to me, is she dangerous? I said, she's dangerous in the fact that she's continuously sending me letters, making it difficult for me to walk out my house or to live in my own home. I want to live. I want to be able to walk out my house and go to my local shop, say hi to my neighbours, my friends and whatever, without having to be worried about where's that person. I used to love my work. I used to do so many good, oh man, I have chances to do so many good things. I lost them all because of her. Because I couldn't tell my bosses this was going on.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. Let's take a look at the Mirror front page and this story regarding the young man that was at the centre of the Hugh Edwards initial case, calling for the BBC chief to quit over how the BBC actually handled the situation back then.
Well, the BBC has certainly not covered itself in glory, and it's clear that staff at the BBC, as well as this young man, are absolutely furious about what has emerged. And I mean, it sounds as if this young man was very vulnerable. I think he was homeless at the time when he started communicating with Hugh Edwards. And I don't know whether Tim Davie should quit, but what has become clear is that he knew about the arrest last autumn, and he and a small group of board members also knew about it, and Hugh Edwards was allowed to carry on getting his salary. And I think the key issue here is not even necessarily the enormous salary that Hugh Edwards continued to be paid after the BBC knew about his arrest. I think the key issue here is the discrepancy between the way they treat the so-called talent as kind of mega gods who are essentially untouchable and whose mental health you should worry about, as opposed to the people working in the studios who work on, many of them on quite low salaries, extremely hard. And quite a few people, it seems, have made complaints about Hugh Edwards' behaviour, and a number of them have said anonymously that they don't feel those complaints were taken seriously. So I think it's that sense that there is one rule for the people at the top who are incredibly well paid and one rule for everyone else. That seems to me the key problem.
Benedict, if you don't mind, can we move on to another story just because of time? And that's The Observer and this story about what's described as a pointless anti-strike Tory law to be scrapped.
Yes, this was, I think, going back some time now to the Conservative government and their legislation around making sure that certain key industries provided a minimum level of service even when they were taking industrial action. Well, the new government, the Labour government, has said that departments should simply ignore that legislation, but that's a curious thing, because on the one hand, you know, obviously there were major concerns at the time about any government sort of messing around with people's right to strike, with their right to withdraw their labour, and, you know, obviously moral debates, therefore, around things like the NHS or firefighters or whoever it might be. But given that, obviously, the new Labour government has just come to an accord with the junior doctors on the back of a series of strikes, and given that there is likely now to be a series of strikes by GPs as well, it's an interesting thing. One wonders if it is a sort of an olive branch that's being handed by the Labour government ahead of what it perceives might be an increased number of attempts by public sector workers to try to get a pay rise. Because there's no doubt, actually, that a lot of them are very underpaid. Their wages have not kept up with inflation. But, as the government is at great pains to tell us, it doesn't have a great deal of money at the moment. So it's in an awkward position where it's shown to the world, well, striking does work. The junior doctors have shown that. But it's not really financially able to turn around to everybody and say, yes, you can all have your pay rises as well. But how about this little piece of legislation that we're just going to roll back so that actually you don't have to be sort of bound by minimum appearances and stuff when you go on strike.
A bit of a sweetener. Yeah. To the Express, Christina, a little bit on the Olympics. More medals, magic on Super Saturday.
Yes, well, I'm probably the only person in the country who's watched almost none of it. So but I'm very happy that people who've worked extremely hard have won medals, and that they seem to be, we seem to be on our way to a record haul of medals. And it's particularly touching, the story about Tom and his sister, what's her name, in that photograph there, who are both on different rowing teams, I think, who both won medals. Yes. And that's a very sweet story. So altogether, I think it, you know, is a bit of much-needed joy and cheer at a time when a lot of grim things are going on.
I was watching the 4x100 relay just before we left, and we got a bronze in that. Completely unexpected, and thought, that's a good note to end.
Hey, Team G. Team GB. Christina and Benedict, thank you both. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, the next few days will bring rain to the north and west, locally heavy, but most other places look fine. It'll be largely dry to start the day, but cloud will be quite extensive, giving a little rain in the west. Clearer skies in the northeast of Scotland and southwest England mean it'll be quite chilly in some rural spots there. Parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Western Isles will see more general rain moving in through the morning, with strengthening winds too. Elsewhere, it'll be largely dry with bright spells, but thicker cloud in the north. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, we'll have the latest on a day of protests and counter-demonstrations across the country.